Today's lesson is an introduction to Native Americans. Let's go over some vocabulary. Our first word is borrow. Say borrow. Borrow means to take or use something for a while and then return it. Coast. Say coast. Coast is the land next to the sea or ocean. Deserts. Say deserts. Deserts are large, dry areas of land with little rain. Roamed. Say roamed. Roamed means wandered. And our last word is tribes. Say tribes. Tribes are groups of similar people who share a language, common ancestors, customs, and laws. For the next several days, you will be learning about Native Americans. Native Americans were the first known people to live on the continents of North and South America. We live in North America. Another term for Native American is American Indian. Although we use the terms Native American or American Indian when we talk about them, there are many different groups of Native Americans, and these groups are called tribes. Each group or tribe has its own way of eating, dressing, and living, depending on where they live in North or South America. Today, you are going to hear about many Native American tribes, but over the next several days, you are going to hear about three particular tribes: the Lakota Sioux, the Wampanoag, and the Lenape. All tribes needed food, clothing, and shelter to stay alive, but each tribe had its own way of eating, dressing, and living depending on where it lived. Different places have different types of weather. So where we live affects what we eat, the type of houses that we live in, and the kinds of clothes that we wear. So today I want you to listen carefully to find out what some tribes of Native Americans were, what they ate, and what kinds of houses they lived in. Introduction to Native Americans. Long, long ago, long before you and I can remember, long before your grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents can remember, there were no people living on the land where we live today. There were woods and plains, but no people. There were deserts and mountains, but no people. And remember, a desert is a large, dry area of land that gets very little rain. There were plenty of birds and fish and animals and insects, but there were no people. But that was thousands of years ago, much earlier than any of us can remember. The first known people who lived in America, called Native Americans or American Indians, lived in all parts of the continent. Some lived in the desert, others lived in the mountains, some lived in the woods, and others lived on the coast near the ocean. The coast is the land next to the ocean or sea. People of the desert lived very different from coastal people. Can you guess why that would be? Why would the people in the desert live different than the people on the coast? Let's keep listening to find out. You are going to learn about some of the different ways America's first known people or Native Americans lived. The Native Americans of long ago all needed the same things we need today. They needed food and water to stay alive. They needed shelter, places to protect themselves from the weather and wild animals. And they needed clothing to keep themselves warm and dry. But the food the desert people ate was not the same kind of food the coastal people ate. And the houses that protected people in the woods did not look the same as the houses of those who lived in the desert. Some lived in teepees. Some lived in weetus. Some lived in hogans. Some lived in pueblos. And others lived in longhouses. Native Americans of long ago had to rely on their knowledge of nature, of the earth, the plants, and the animals that surrounded them. And everywhere they roamed or wandered, these Native Americans found ways to borrow or use from the earth all that they needed to live. So to borrow means to take or use something for a while and then return it. Some Native Americans grew their own vegetables and fruits. Others hunted buffalo. Some Native Americans hunted woodland animals. Others caught fish from rivers, lakes, and oceans. Some Native Americans cooked their food over an open fire. Others baked food in specially made ovens. The Native Americans also needed water, but there were no sinks with running water inside their homes. So where do you think the Native Americans found water long ago? Where could they go to find water? Let's see. Native Americans collected rainwater. They also got their water from lakes, rivers, and streams. Native Americans of long ago did not have cars or trucks. There were no buses or trains or planes. So do you know how they got around? What would they use to get around to different places? Long ago, Native Americans traveled by foot. Here, the word foot is being used to describe the part of your body that is at the end of your leg. There were no paved roads. Native American paths were made by the pounding of their own footsteps and the hooves of animal herds. After Native Americans were here for many years, they started riding horses. After that, some traveled on horseback. And others traveled in canoes. Those who lived in the woods used their feet to make their way through thick forests of trees. After many years, those who lived on open plains welcomed the speed of horses to carry them long distances. And those who lived near lakes and rivers relied upon canoes to carry them across the waters. No matter where they lived, Native Americans made all of their own clothes. Some Native American women and girls wore skirts and dresses. Men and boys often wore breechcloths and leggings. They used materials from their surroundings to make their clothes. What do you see in this picture? Some Native Americans wore clothing made of animal skins: elk, deer, buffalo, and rabbit. They often decorated their clothing with beads, porcupine quills, and fringe. During the cold winter months, they wore coats of animal fur to stay warm. Others wore clothes made from soft inner bark of the cedar tree, sometimes decorated with seashells. Still, others wore clothing made of fibers from different plants, cotton and yucca, and trimmed them with animal bones. In winter, they covered themselves with cloaks to stay warm. Many men, women, boys, and girls in each of the Native American tribes across the land, from the oceans to the plains to the woods, wore moccasins on their feet. Tribes are groups of similar people who share a language, customs, and laws. They also have the same ancestors, such as great great grandparents. Some, however, preferred bare feet. And so you see, the people who first came to live on this rich and varied land that we now call the United States of America were just as rich and varied as the land itself. They were alike in some ways and different in other ways, just as the people of America today. So that was an introduction to Native Americans. You're going to learn a lot more about Native American tribes in the next couple days. You can go ahead and answer the questions now.